It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning at the airport. Passengers dragging luggage, flight announcements echoing through the terminals, and people rushing past each other in a blur of stress and schedules. But what no one expected was that within a few minutes, security cameras would capture a scene so shocking, so surreal, it would end up on every major news channel in the country. 2 police officers, red-faced and trembling, were seen on their knees, their voices shaking as they begged a man in handcuffs for forgiveness. What they didn't know, what no one around them realized at first, was that the man they had just manhandled and cuffed wasn't a random traveler or someone causing a disturbance. He was the sitting governor of the state, and he had just returned from a private diplomatic mission overseas. It all began with a simple misunderstanding, or at least that's what the officers would later claim. The man, dressed in a plain hoodie, jeans and baseball cap, didn't look anything like the high-powered official he actually was. There was no security detail that day, no entourage, no press waiting at the gates. He wanted to travel quietly and alone without drawing attention. He had told his staff to keep it that way. It was his daughter's birthday, and he had promised to be home before dinner. But as fate would have it, the 2 officers at the security checkpoint weren't focused on keeping the peace that morning. They were looking for someone to profile, someone they believed didn't belong. At the same time, just a few gates away, another story was quietly unfolding, one that would change a young man's life forever. Jalen, a 17-year-old black teen with a shy smile and worn-out sneakers, had just made it through TSA with his one small backpack. He was headed to a scholarship interview that could open the doors to a future he never thought possible. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table, Jalen knew what struggle looked like. But he also knew kindness, patience, and how to carry himself with dignity, even when the world refused to see him. As he looked around the waiting area for an open seat, his eyes landed on a woman standing near the corner of the gate. She looked exhausted, one hand holding her back, the other cradling her swollen belly. No one moved. Everyone was buried in their phones or pretending not to notice. Jalen stood up from his seat without a word and gestured for her to sit. She hesitated at first, looking unsure, but when their eyes met, something shifted. She smiled weakly, thanked him softly, and lowered herself into the seat he gave up. They didn't speak much, just a few polite words. But as she adjusted her purse and pulled out a small bottle of water, she reached into her coat and handed Jalen a folded note. "You don't know how much that meant to me," she whispered. "Read this when you're alone." He nodded, not thinking much of it, and turned back toward the window, watching the planes take off. Meanwhile, back near the security checkpoint, the 2 officers were growing more aggressive with the man in the hoodie. He had refused to show ID immediately, not because he was hiding anything, but because he was still reaching for his diplomatic passport in his carry-on. But the moment he mentioned he was the governor, the officers burst out laughing, accusing him of impersonating a public official. Without warning, they grabbed his arms, yanked them behind his back, and cuffed him tightly. One of them muttered something under his breath, something caught clearly on the security camera audio. And that's when everything began to unravel. A woman from another checkpoint ran toward the chaos, her radio in hand, her face pale. She had just confirmed the governor's identity. The man they had thrown to the ground was not only who he claimed to be, he was also someone who had publicly supported funding for anti-racism training in law enforcement, a known advocate for accountability. And now he had become a victim of the very system he had vowed to reform. The officers froze, panic setting in. One of them immediately uncuffed the governor, while the other fell to his knees, his voice cracking as he begged, "Please. We didn't know. We didn't mean..." But it was too late. By then, several travelers had pulled out their phones. Videos were being recorded, some already uploaded to social media. In a matter of minutes, the airport had become a battlefield of murmurs, gasps, and disbelief. At gate 34, Jalen sat quietly, the note still folded in his pocket. He didn't know what was happening down the terminal. He didn't know that he would soon be connected to that same news cycle, not as a suspect or a victim, but as a symbol of something good in the middle of so much wrong. As the boarding call echoed through the loudspeakers, the pregnant woman leaned forward slightly and touched his arm. "I meant what I said," she told him. "Read the note." He nodded, stood up again to let her through, and found himself lost in thought. For some reason, those simple words had stayed with him. Maybe it was the way she said them, or maybe it was something else, an instinct that told him this moment wasn't just random. It was something bigger. He slipped the note into his jacket, zipped it up, and walked toward the gate with a strange feeling in his chest. Behind him, the chaos at the other end of the terminal had exploded. Officers from Airport Command had arrived. Journalists were on their way. A few passengers shouted questions. Someone yelled, "You just cuffed the governor, are you serious?" And through it all, the governor remained calm, stoic even, as he looked into the cameras and asked for a moment of silence. "I don't want anger," he said. "I want truth. I want change. And this, what happened here today, is why that change is needed." Jalen, now seated on the plane beside the window, reached into his jacket pocket and finally opened the note. As his eyes scanned the words, inside his mouth parted slightly. He looked around, then read it again. The message was short, handwritten, but its impact was immediate, and just like that, everything changed. But what did the note say? And how could a simple act of kindness at the airport connect two completely different lives? A teenage boy with a dream, and a powerful man humiliated in public. The answers were coming, but not yet, because some stories don't reveal their heart until you're already halfway through. Jalen stared at the note in his hands, his fingers tightening around the paper as the words echoed in his mind. He didn't blink. He didn't move. It was like time had slowed down, everything around him melting into a dull hum. The woman had written something that shook him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made his heart race with confusion, surprise, and something else he couldn't name yet. He wanted to read it again, but the flight attendant came by, asking him to buckle up, her smile tight and rehearsed. He nodded, stuffed the note back into his jacket pocket, and clicked his seatbelt. Outside, the plane was slowly rolling toward the runway, but inside his head, everything had stopped. Across the airport, the mood had shifted drastically. Travelers were whispering. Phone screens were glowing with headlines popping up in real time. Someone had already uploaded a video of the incident. Blurry, shaky footage of the two officers dragging the governor down to the floor, pushing his face into the tiles, and yelling at him to stop resisting, as he calmly tried to explain who he was. The internet didn't take long to explode. The governor's name, Ronald Ellis, was trending within 30 minutes. He wasn't just a leader. He was a former judge, a well-respected advocate for criminal justice reform, and someone known for quietly making waves in politics without ever raising his voice. That morning, he had stepped off a 10-hour international flight hoping to spend time with his daughter. Instead, he was shoved face down onto the floor of an airport because two officers decided that a black man in a hoodie couldn't possibly be who he said he was. But Ronald Ellis wasn't the type to explode in rage. His strength wasn't loud. It came in silence, in long stares, in carefully chosen words that carried more power than 1,000 screams. And as he stood, wiping the blood from his lip and straightening his jacket, he looked at the officers who had just humiliated him in front of dozens of strangers. One of them was crying now. The other was trying to explain, voice shaking, about a misunderstanding and protocol. Ronald didn't yell, he didn't curse, he didn't even raise his hand. He simply looked them in the eyes and said, "Tell me, is this what safety looks like to you?" There was no answer, only silence. Then the sound of more sirens arriving, more uniforms running in, more cameras being lifted. Jalen, now in the air, leaned back in his seat. The engines roared softly outside, but his thoughts were louder. He took the note out again, read it for the third time. There were only 3 lines. "You have no idea who I am, but I know who you are. Your kindness will change your life. Don't throw this opportunity away." He read it again. Still didn't understand. Who was she? He had assumed she was just another passenger, a tired, pregnant woman grateful for a seat. But this note, it felt like more than a thank you. It felt intentional, like she had been waiting for him, watching. Him. The way she'd looked at him, was it just gratitude or something deeper? Had she known something he didn't? He remembered her voice when she handed him the note. Calm but sure. Not like someone surprised by kindness, but like someone expecting it. He pulled out his phone, no signal yet, still in the air. He wanted to look her up, though he didn't even know her name. He closed his eyes and tried to replay everything she'd said. But she hadn't said much. That smile, though, it hadn't felt random. Meanwhile, Ronald Ellis was taken to a quiet conference room at the airport, away from the noise, the whispers, and the flashing phones. His assistant had finally arrived after being stuck in traffic, her face pale and horrified as she entered the room. "Sir," she said breathlessly, "do you want to go to the press now?" He shook his head. "Not yet, they'll write their own stories either way. Let them." She opened her mouth to speak again, but stopped herself. She knew him well enough to know when his mind was working through something. He was always calm, even in chaos, but today felt different. The humiliation was fresh. The sting was still on his wrists from the handcuffs. And worst of all, the look in the officer's eyes wasn't confusion. It was certainty. They had truly believed he couldn't be anyone important. Because of how he looked. Because of his skin. Because he didn't fit. Elsewhere, the video continued to circulate. Newsrooms had picked it up. Some outlets softened the headline, "Mistaken Identity Incident at Airport," while others told the truth more directly. Governor of State handcuffed by officers in apparent racial profiling incident. The public was split. Some defended the cops. Others were outraged. But in the middle of it all, Ronald remained quiet. He wasn't finished thinking yet. And then, somewhere between cloud layers and altitude meters, Jalen's phone buzzed. Signal had returned. He tapped on his messages, but nothing new. Then he opened his email just to check. And there it was, an email he hadn't expected, from a name he didn't recognize. Subject line, "About the note you received." His stomach dropped a little. He opened it. "Dear Jalen, this may sound strange, but we've been watching your journey. You stood out today, not because of where you're from or how you look, but because of how you act when no one is watching. We believe in rewarding character. Please follow the instructions below exactly. Your future depends on it." He blinked. There were no attachments, no signatures, just a link and a temporary access code. He didn't click it. Not yet. His heart was pounding. How did they know his name, his email? Was this connected to the woman? Was this real? A scam? He read the message again. Every word. Then looked around the plane. Everything seemed normal. People half asleep, headphones on. Flight, attendants pushing carts. Nothing to suggest his world was shifting. But it was. He could feel it. And back at the airport, Ronald Ellis stood in the conference room and finally turned to his assistant. "Find out who that boy was," he said quietly. She frowned. "Which boy?" "The one who gave up his seat for that woman." "He was near gate 34. I saw him on the security feed." "You think he's involved?" "I don't know yet, but something about today, none of it feels random." She nodded slowly and pulled out her tablet. Neither Ronald nor Jalen knew how close their stories were about to intertwine. Neither of them could guess how a simple act of kindness would trigger a chain of events that would shake the foundations of power, race, and justice. But the pieces were already moving, and soon the world would be watching.